Let's return to This Week in America. Here's your host, Rick Bratton.
Welcome back, everybody, coast to coast. This Week in America. Getting Right with God by Joseph C. Way was written primarily for professing Judeo-Christians, but it applies to everyone. It challenges the status quo of many modern-day religious beliefs and practices, while offering a logical, factual, and specific alternative. Joseph was born on a small farm in southern Mississippi along with 6 siblings. After graduating from high school with highest honors, he entered Millsaps College and earned a B.A. 1 year later, Joseph entered Vanderbilt Divinity School, earned a Bachelor of Divinity and a Master of Divinity. For 42 years, an active minister in the United Methodist Church, with 23 as an Air Force chaplain, 5 as a VA chaplain, and 14 as the pastor of local churches. In 1964, due to his efforts to promote integration, he was forced to leave the state to protect and provide for his family and himself. Now, for his efforts to promote integration, he was awarded membership in Who's Who in American Methodism. Joseph, a certified therapist for alcohol and drug abuse, resulting in a book outlining a new approach to recognition and treatment entitled A Pain in the Gut. Along with his wife of 65 years, they now live in a retirement community in Georgetown, Texas. Back with us on This Week in America, Joseph C. Way, author of Getting Right with God. Joseph, welcome back to the program. It's a pleasure to have you back with us.
Thank you. A pleasure to be back.
This is an important book and an important message, and the book available wherever books are sold, and Joseph's website, gettingrightwithgod.com. Information there. You can order that as well, and we'll give you that as we go through the conversation today. One thing, Joseph, you talk a lot about in the book is basic human nature. Explain, if you will, what that is. What is our basic human nature?
I'm convinced that our basic nature is to love. And let's be sure what we're talking about when we speak of love. Love is to value. I wish someone had told me that many years ago. But when you love something, you value it. And so our nature is always to value something. We cannot survive without having something to love. We also cannot survive very well if we don't think we are loved or valued by something or someone. And my theory is that this is God's nature also, to love, and that we are created in God's image, that we are to love and to love appropriately, which means to act like God as best we can.
Joseph Way is our guest back on This Week in America, talking about his book, Getting Right with God. Very simple. That's the name of the book and Joseph's website, gettingrightwithgod.com. I want to talk about that again for a second. Give us sort of a layman's definition of love. That's an expression we throw around a lot. We love our wife, we love our family, we love pizza. You know, we seem to throw that around all the time out there. What is the meaning of love, do you think?
Love is to value something. Now, we may love the right thing, or we may love something that is inappropriate for us. And when I say the right thing, I speak of that as appropriate love, or to value things as are helpful, beneficial, useful for us in terms of the kind of love that we believe God has for us. Now, to love God above all else means to love Him or to value Him and to make our life in tune with that which He is, or to value something else, to love something else. It becomes our God, and we do whatever it dictates to us. So love is the key by which we live, whether it is an appropriate love or an inappropriate love.
Is there more than one God? Something that comes up often, you address it in the book, Getting Right with God. Is there more than one God?
Whatever one values above all else is God. Spell that with a little g. So whatever that we make the most important thing in our life, and it could be almost anything we can imagine, that would be a God in the terms that I'm using it here, or it controls us. Now, the Judeo-Christian church has tried to identify the proper gods and the improper gods by dividing it into two categories. Gods, of course, the God of the Judeo-Christian faith, and then idols. And so all things that the Christian church identifies as not loving the Judeo-Christian God, then that's an idol that one has. But in all practical purposes, it is God also.
This is a fascinating book. You can see why it's receiving rave reviews. It's a thought-provoking book. The book is Getting Right with God by Joseph Way, W-A-Y. His website, gettingrightwithgod.com. Find the book at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, the usual places, litprime.com as well. Another topic you address in there, and it's really something that needs to be read. You discuss Jesus. Who was Jesus?
That's hard to say. It depends on who you ask.
Oh, yes.
Such a small supply of things that we can really hang our hat on and say, yes, that's who Jesus was. After he became rather significant, I'm afraid people created stories and events and things about him that were not true. But we have made him into who he never claimed to be. Jesus, we believe, was a rather normal person. I propose born in a normal birth without a great deal of fanfare to rather normal people. And we believe that he was not terribly wealthy, the family wasn't, because of the sacrifices that they made at his dedication or other items in his life. It was for the small individual people. But Jesus may have been, and this again is maybe my conjecture as well as maybe a few others, may have been a temple child, which means that his family gave him to the temple to be raised from a very small child to perhaps his bar mitzvah. So this is one of the reasons why Jesus, I think, knew so much about the temple and the worship and the scriptures and all of that. But I think he was a man that was somewhat like you and I, but who got so dedicated and devoted to the teachings of God that they he embodied them in his life and was willing to remain true to them, even if it cost him his death.
I told you this book would get you thinking. This book is excellently written, receiving rave reviews, Kirkus, Pacific Book Reviews, U.S. Review of Books. All the book reviews, all the information on the book, and a chance to order the book at Joseph's website, gettingrightwithgod.com. Joseph, from where did Jesus get his two primary directives? Where did that come from?
They came primarily from his Judaism and from the ancient Hebrew religion. It was the ancient Hebrews who, when they first began to worship the one God, and they began to ask, now, what does this God require of us? And they concluded he requires us to love God or him above all else and our neighbor as ourself. And so when Jesus came upon the scene and started looking for guides for his life, this was what he came upon and what he captured out of the ancient Hebrew religion. It had been proposed there, and then the people lost out on, or just began to renounce or turn aside from that. The ancient prophets came along and called the people back to that. Then when Judaism failed and moved into the sacrificial system, Jesus came along and picked it up again. So Jesus is only proclaiming what the ancient Hebrews said when they first declared of who God is and that they should worship Him above all else and their neighbor as their self.
Joseph Way is our guest, back with us on This Week in America. His book is Getting Right with God. His website, gettingrightwithgod.com. Joseph, what do you mean when you say there are laws we did not make and cannot break? What does that mean?
That means that they are here in spite of ourselves, whether we know it or not. And this is some of the interesting things that came to me as I was writing the book here. You know, the law, love God above all else and your neighbor as yourself. You can't break that law because you're going to love a God of some sort, maybe, as we would say, an idol, but it is still your God. And then you're going to love your neighbor as you love yourself, because you can't love yourself appropriately and your neighbor inappropriately, or vice versa. If you love yourself inappropriately, you can't love your neighbor appropriately. It's just a law that we didn't make and we can't break. Or some of the other events in life, or some of the other things in life, is the fact that we got to love something. There's no way to get away from it, or else life is not going to work like it ought to. These are some of the things. There are others, and people maybe will stumble upon them as you go along.
Well, and you'll get to thinking as you're reading Joseph's book, topics appropriate: love, spirit, truth, reason, knowledge, faith, action, all brought to life, and so much more in Getting Right with God. I want to go back and touch on what you had said about Jesus a few minutes ago. Now, in your view, was there no need for a predetermined crucifixion, blood sacrifice, ransom, and resurrection?
Right. Primarily because that God is only a God of love. He is love, and He does what He is. So mankind has never drifted away from God to the point that God didn't love them. And so if the way to get right with God is to love God above all else and your neighbor as yourself, then we do not need any preordained sacrifice or ransom or anything of that nature. And I don't think Jesus ever pointed to or talked about any of that in His life. Now, in later writing, some of the people, I think, made it to sound like Jesus did that, but I don't think so. There's no need for any of this for, I call, salvation, or to get right with God, because once we love as we ought to love, then that gets us right with God, and we need none of the other things you mentioned.
What is the nature of God, and are we like Him in any way?
Okay. Yes. God values us, and He values His creation. And He is the Creator, and He has called upon us to be co-creators with Him. And this is a part of love. Love always creates. Hate and inappropriate love destroys. And so when we become loving creatures, we begin to be creative in terms of making life better for ourselves and others. Love is given. It is wanting for another that which is good for them, even if we have to give up a little bit of something that we have so that they might have what they need in life. And I see God like this, as well as this being the criteria as to whether or not we love our neighbor as we ought.
Getting Right with God is the book. Joseph C. Way is our guest on the program. GettingRightWithGod.com is the website. Time going by so quickly. I want to go back to something you just said there because it's crucial for all of us. How do we learn to love appropriately and avoid inappropriate love?
That's a tough issue. We learn from someone else, I think, basically. So we're all victims of the environment into which we were born. If we have been trained to love something other than the Judeo-Christian God, we will learn it from the parents and the society in which we live. I'm convinced that we have been mistaken for many, many years in terms of what is the appropriate response to loving God. I think the history of religion in terms of Judeo-Christian religion and modern-day religion have failed to understand what it means to love God. We think that if we jump through the hoops or something like that, that's the way you do it. But no, we love God by acting like God and by being taught in proper religious surroundings and in families that know how to love and to be loving.
Who was included in the invitation and requirement to love God above all else and their neighbor as themselves?
I think everyone. I have primarily focused on Judeo-Christians in the book, but there's just a little snippet in there in which I refer to the fact that anyone who practices this by whatever name they call their God, if it is a divine being for them, and if they love him above all else, or her, or it, whatever the proper term is, if they love that God above all else and their neighbor as themselves, and practice this caring, giving, helping, productive kind of association with their neighbor, then they are getting right with God, even by some other title or term.
Why is it necessary for us to practice this kind of living? What is the importance in living this way?
It makes all the difference in the world when one does this. As I mentioned earlier, to practice inappropriate love is to be destructive in one way or another, even of yourself, if not something else. To practice appropriate love is to be helping and caring and the kind of person that other people like to have around. You're more healthy, you are happy, whereas if you do not practice that kind of life, then things certainly don't go well and you're not a happy camper.
Our guest on the program is Joseph Way. Getting Right with God is the name of his book. His website, GettingRightWithGod.com. For 42 years, an active minister in the United Methodist Church. A couple of minutes left here at the end. I'm sure people are listening and basically hanging at every word and getting information what you're telling them, because it's different than what they're hearing from other places possibly. Where did you get these ideas? Where did this come from, the research to work on getting right with God?
This has come to me, I guess, over the years. I have never been totally satisfied with the proclamations of the Christian church. And so over the years, I have looked and looked to see if I could find something that made some sense to me. And as I say in the book, this is something that finally solved the squiggle in my gizzard. That it just makes sense that if Jesus and the early Hebrew people thought this way, then, and if this was the primary teaching of Jesus, and if Paul, I think, got it all incorrect, though Paul, the Apostle Paul, did say a lot of good things, I think that he failed to see Jesus as he ought. And so it just finally seems to be the most reasonable, rational thing that I could come up with, as well as an expression of faith in God that I also love.
What do you hope the takeaway is when people read Getting Right with God? What do you hope the message is that resonates with them? A takeaway from reading your book?
I hope they find some truth that the Christian community has misled us, I think, for many years. And I hope that they will re-examine their own beliefs. They don't necessarily need to accept us because I said it, accept it because it's true. And I'm a great believer in truth. So I'm hoping that this will guide them to find more truth in their life so that they will be happy and contented and helpful and useful in the world in which we live and be co-creators.
Joseph Way, W-A-Y, is our guest back with us on This Week in America. Always a pleasure to have Joseph with us. And the book is Getting Right with God. Very simple. That is the title of the book. His website is gettingrightwithgod.com. You'll find it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, litprime.com, all of the usual places. Joseph, it is always a pleasure to have you on the program. A very important message. Thank you once again for being with us on the program. Hopefully we can catch up again. Thank you for being with us.
Okay, thank you.
Joseph Way, our guest. Getting Right with God is the name of his book. You'll find information, of course, on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. And you're listening to This Week in America, and there's more on today's program right after these messages.
This Week in America is online. You can visit our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Scott Pinkerton, Associate Producer of This Week in America. Jay Anderson, Segment Producer. Ben Watson, Webmaster. Otto Bechet, Director of Engineering and TV Production. This Week in America produced and is a trademark of Blue Funk Broadcasting, LLC. For information on all of our guests and to listen to this week's show, our website again at thisweekinamerica.us. And I'm Sean Bratton, Executive Producer of This Week in America.